Are here. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to this Jane's Walks. On behalf of myself, Justin Rivers, Chief Experience Officer from UMTAP New York. I'm also very happy to be here with Brad Vogel, who is a member of the Preservation Committee of the City Club, and the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council, Simeon Bankoff. All three of us today will be walking you through, whether in person or virtually, the endangered buildings and neighborhood around Penn Station, which have been in the news lately quite a bit because of the new plan. So without much ado, I'm just going to get started. Brad, why don't you say hello? And Simeon, why don't you say hello before I get going?
You got it.
Go for it, Simeon.
Oh, I was just going to do a big welcome to everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. Simeon Bankoff, Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council. We're the citywide advocate for New York's historic places. I'll be posting things in the chat for ways for people to get involved in this campaign. And a big, huge round of applause for our man on the street, Brad Vogel. Among Brad's many, many other things, he is an enormous Walt Whitman scholar and an advocate for the Whitman House. And as Whitman was a great fan of strolling, he's the perfect guide for this.
Thanks, Simeon. Yes, it's great to be flaneuring out here right now between the old Penn Station service building, or the power plant behind me, which you can see here with its great big grating on it, as if it's a well-defended Florentine palazzo. But this building was actually predates Penn Station, old Penn Station. It was built in 1908 by McKim, Mead, and White, and it is still somehow miraculously here. And I think that's the whole point today, is that we're talking about some really incredible buildings that have managed to survive here in the middle of Manhattan. But let me just flip this around and I'll show you something else that you might recognize, because I am right across from Penn Station itself in all its mundane glory, or lack thereof. But Justin, I think you wanted to dive in a little bit on the power plant itself.
Yeah, so actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to give everybody an overview on the plan that is threatening the power plant. And then I will turn it back over to you to give us a little bit of a walk. So I'm just going to, I am going to share this with you. And this was the slide that was supposed to welcome you when you came in, but best laid plans. Okay. And so obviously this is where Brad is. We are happy to have you. Let me just quickly give you a rundown on where we are. I'm not going to go into station history today, although the Pennsylvania Railroad did buy up this very large chunk of neighborhood in order to create this amazing infrastructural project, which was the North River Tunnel, tracks leading to the largest train station in the world. And pretty much from Broadway to the river in this area of the 30s was the Pennsylvania Railroad's domain. They built Penn. This opens up, this is a photo from 1910. The reason why I'm showing it to you is not because of Penn. I have done many Penn Jane's Walks. I do in-person live remnants of Penn Station tours. Actually, there's one this Saturday at 2 p.m. if you're interested. But of the two sites on this photograph, which we will be talking about, Brad will be bringing you there, where these arrows are pointing, which is that pit of sand, which is the Hotel Pennsylvania, which, if you have been keeping up with the news, you know is slated for demolition sooner rather than later. And that spire is the spire of St. John the Baptist Church. Now, skipping straight ahead to one of the reasons why we are here today and urging you to get involved in helping to preserve these buildings was in 2016, after many years of having a Penn Station that did not or does not work to process the 600,000 people who are going through it, Governor Cuomo announced something called the Pennsylvania Station Farley Complex. And that was, again, this was sort of the ominous rendering that was sent out, which was including a whole Empire Station Gateway complex that meant turning Farley Post Office into Moynihan, which we now have, and reimagining Penn Station. And the reason why I'm showing you this direct rendering, because if you think of the name, the Empire Station Complex, and this color scheme, it sort of makes you think of the evil galactic empire in Star Wars. But I'm a huge nerd. So what happened was Cuomo was actually picking up where Daniel Patrick Moynihan, great senator and preservationalist for New York and other cities as well, left off, which was to design a new and better Penn Station using a McKim Mead and White building, the post office, which was built as a sister building to the original Penn Station. And of course, he garners support from the president, from Governor Pataki at the time, but funding never really goes through. And we have one financial crisis from the other. It keeps getting tabled. And then, and here is this beautiful 1912 McKim Mead and White building, which now houses Farley Train Hall. Moynihan Train Hall. I'm still flustered from this thing not working. And then a year later, after he makes this announcement in January of 2017, January 2020, he actually announces that it's time to build a new terminal south of Penn, taking the 30th and 31st Street block south of Penn, destroying the buildings on it and creating something called Penn Station South to provide 8 tracks, increasing track capacity, which, as I have said many times, is needed in Penn, but not at the expense of some of these buildings, which should be landmarked, but at present are not. And of course, this January, we get Moynihan Station, or Moynihan Train Hall, which has been revealed to applause. It is a good building. It's a nice design. Of course, I think the strength of the design is actually the fact that it uses the McKim Mead and White building so well. It has increased waiting capacity at Penn Station by 50%. So what this train hall did was provide a little bit more light and humanity for Penn, but it also gave a little bit more space to breathe for those people who end up waiting for trains, mainly servicing Amtrak and some of LIRR. New Jersey Transit are not serviced here. But of course, an acre of glass, that Art Deco clock, which is actually an homage to the old Penn Station, both the glass roof and that clock, which was designed by Penn Pennoyer Architects, the clock. And Governor Cuomo has this quote, which he is very correct. This would have been an amazing accomplishment in any time, but it is an extraordinary accomplishment today, as dark as 2020 was. To me, this hall brings the light literally and figuratively. But what was announced this January, right after this opening, was a large-scale reimagining of the neighborhood around Penn Station. And there was a proposal put out, and basically this new Empire Station Complex project description has 4 phases to it. And I'm just going to go over them very quickly so I can turn it over to Brad. Number 1 was the creation of a revitalized transit-oriented commercial district to benefit Penn Station and revitalize the surrounding area. So the idea is to revitalize Penn, which still needs a lot of help. As Brad said, it's still mundane, it's still crowded, it's still cramped under Madison Square Garden. Moynihan is a breath of fresh air, but there's a lot more work to be done at Penn. And Cuomo says to do that, we actually have to get rid of everything around Penn to create a new neighborhood to generate income so that we can pay for Penn. Now, this is the map of all of the sites in question that would encompass the Empire Station Complex. As you can see, we are going to focus a lot today on Site 2, but I believe Brad will also be taking us past Site 3 and Site 7 as well. And of course, he starts at the 8th Avenue end of Site 2, which is the Penn Station powerhouse. Now, part 2 of this project description is improvements to area subway stations and transit connections with Penn Station, which we can all agree, if we know Penn, very well needed. So what they want to do is offer up more and humane entrances to the ACE. They want to widen existing stairways and add new stairways for both the ACE and the 123. They're also looking into opening up a corridor once again that may connect the BDFM NQRW at Herald Square to Penn, which used to be known as the Gimbels Passageway to people who remember it when it was closed in the early 1980s, mid 1980s, I think. So we're not against that, right? That's great. Number three, the implementation of public realm improvements, which means basically street level stuff. What they want to do is share the streets with pedestrians and bikers, widen some of the sidewalks, which again is necessary in this area of the neighborhood, of course. And again, I'm going through this. This is very bird's eye stuff right here. But this is the part that I want to revisit, and it's the creation of a revitalized transit-oriented commercial district to benefit Penn Station and revitalize the surrounding areas, which actually require bulldozing quite a few of these station-centric early 19th century, in some cases, Beaux-Arts buildings, which are not yet protected by landmark, to provide the space for towers, super tall towers. And this was the rendering that was sent out with this proposal at the beginning of the year. And as you can see, the idea is to shear off the 30th and 31st Street block south of Penn Station and create 10 new buildings. And as you can see by the color codes, you've got mainly office, retail, hotel, and very little open space, by the way, although that's touted in the plan, but it's mainly office, as you can see. Those are all blue, super tall buildings. Here's another angle, just to give you perspective from the west looking east of what this neighborhood would become. Here's your square footage totals. So this was, again, in this proposed project plan. You are looking at a total of 19 million gross square feet, a lion's share of it being office space. And of course, one of the biggest arguments that gets thrown around immediately from opponents of this plan is, do we really need this much office space in an age that was moving to virtual before the pandemic, almost fully virtual now? Are we going back to bricks and mortar offices? And is this absolutely necessary? Now, there is also within the footprint of this project other buildings that could be affected negatively by the plan if it goes as they would like it to for this Empire Station complex. And I know Brad might get a little bit more into that as he's walking around. But you've got 10 buildings which are eligible for NYC landmark designation, and then you've got 38 eligible for state and national landmark status in this sort of footprint of what we're dealing with in this area, and most of which are being ignored, mainly so that they can be destroyed. And of course, the one that comes to everybody's mind recently, since it's been in the news over the past 2 weeks, is the Hotel Pennsylvania, which is most definitely slated for demolition to be replaced with something called Penn 15, a Vornado run office tower. What's being done at Penn right now is the work that's being completed is a refit of the LIRR concourse, raising the ceilings by 10 feet, increasing corridor space, trying to bring more light down. They opened up the new entryway from 33rd and 7th down into Penn. This is just one of the renderings of what the new LIRR will look like in Penn downstairs. This is the actual new entrance, which opened December 31st of last year of 2020 in tandem with Moynihan. And these are the newest renderings that Cuomo put out. I believe this was 2 weeks ago now, might have even been 3, when he announced that there was going to be a new revitalized Penn Station as long as the Empire Station complex is complete. This is Vornado's footprint. Every building in blue is either owned by Vornado or run by Vornado Holdings. And so obviously they are looking to expand their footprint as well around the Penn district. And this is Farley. So this is the extension side of Moynihan, which is slated to be completed this summer. Facebook is the anchor tenant there. This is the 7th Avenue facade of Penn Station and 2 Penn Plaza, which you can see Vornado is planning on resurfacing and creating sort of like this cantilever platform with 2 new floors and open space on the deck. But one thing I want you to notice about these renderings They were released, I think, a year and a half ago. And you'll see that the buildings of the neighborhood are still very much present. The old buildings on 31st Street are still around. You'll even see here the Hotel Pennsylvania is in this rendering right across the street from a new revitalized 2 Penn Plaza. Well, that shifts very quickly when the new renderings were released a couple of weeks ago by Cuomo's office. Here you can see this is a new Empire Penn Station entrance, and all of those buildings have now been replaced by the super talls that were proposed in the Empire Station Complex plan at the beginning of the year. Here is 8th Avenue. So this is what 8th Avenue would look like. And again, what you'll notice is the powerhouse where Brad is standing right now, gone. The other spaces, St. John's Church, also gone. And the Hotel Penn, gone. And here's just another angle. This is a new 33rd Street entrance into Penn. But again, notice those ominous super talls all around. And an inside view of this, I have to say, is, you know, I know Penn very well. I've spent almost 20 years working in and around Penn. These new indoor Penn plans confuse me. I have no idea. I have no idea where any of this is. There's a 1-floor plan and a 2-floor plan. They haven't committed to one yet. And this was one of the renderings, and this looked like Super Mario Brothers. I wasn't even sure what was going on here. I'm still trying to figure it out, and I know the confusing Penn very well. So with that, we are ready to turn it over to Brad, but here we are at the powerhouse, which Brad had mentioned was built in 1908, 2 years before. It serviced all of the power and refrigeration needs for the old station. And it is a McKim Mead and White made of the same granite from Penn Station and the last remnant of Penn. As I turn it over to Brad now, and I'm sure I'll be able to have a message at the end here, is to say, why are we demolishing Penn Station twice? Why are we demolishing these beautiful buildings? And nothing is more in the spirit of Jane Jacobs than the work that we are trying to do to preserve this neighborhood and the buildings that are there. And with that, Brad, I am going to drop my screen share, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good, Justin. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
So we are looking live at the former Penn Station powerhouse, the one that Justin was just talking about. And Justin and Simeon, of course, jump in whenever you have something you want to say, because I am going to be rambling here a bit, both literally and hopefully not too much figuratively. But let's take a walk down the street here, because it's important to get a sense of what we're looking at. Here is the power station, and you can see it's a pretty significant and massive building, but the entirety of the block that this building is in is at risk. Everything that you can see down the street here would get demolished to make way for the proposed Empire Station complex. So let's take a little walk here. And I think another important thing, you know, Simeon was mentioning in the comments that over 500 businesses would be displaced if this goes through, and over 200 residents would be displaced. I think oftentimes this area around Penn is dismissed as being a place that is either less appealing or, you know, even blighted in some people's considerations, but that would be falling into the same trap that the city fell into back when Penn Station itself was allowed to be destroyed just because it had a bit of soot on it in the 1960s. I do want to point out this building. If you look up at the top, you can maybe just see where the sun's peeking over. That stepped back wedding cake, ziggurat style finial to the building. And I'm right at 31st Street, just east of 8th Avenue. But the building in front of me, I think it is not something on all the lists. It is not National Register eligible. It is not State Register eligible. It is not city landmark eligible according to any of the lists in the environmental impact statement. And yet, here is a building with significant architectural detail that is many stories tall, that houses all kinds of businesses. That is what I think is being overlooked in a lot of the press about this project, is how do you quantify the value to the city of buildings like this that in a small town would be the largest building in town. In New York, they're just another building. So I
Many of
think
these
it's really,
buildings also provide important Class B office backroom space, as well as Brad was mentioning, we've been fortunate enough to meet some residents of the neighborhood. In fact, there's even a beautification committee who is working on street enhancements for the people who live there. Now, when we talk about the residents of this neighborhood, it is a very diverse group of people, from longtime people, I don't know if any of them are under rent stabilization or rent control, to people who moved in the last decade or so and have literally spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on rehabbing their buildings and putting them all up to code. And they are deeply concerned about eminent domain coming and taking this. We saw this exact sort of scenario happen in Brooklyn a decade ago with the Atlantic Yards proposal, now called Pacific Park. And there's, again, it is none of the housing has been built over there. It's something that we should all learn from.
so I'm now walking south on 8th Avenue, and several of the residential buildings in this block are right here along this strip above the commercial fronts. But I'm going to step out just a little bit into the street to give you a view of another building.
Be careful, Brad.
I'm being as careful as I can. But you can see that there's some, some great functional and aesthetically pleasing architecture here that has withstood the test of time. And I'm going to round the bend onto 30th Street, and it gets a little quieter here. But again, as I had put in the comments, in terms of the nature of the buildings at risk here, in the environmental impact statement, which for this project runs something like 2,000 pages long, just gives you a sense of the scope of the demolition that would happen. You have buildings like this that they don't even register. There are only 6 buildings that would be directly, that would be eligible for the National Register and the State Register, and 3 that are eligible according to LPC for listing as individual city landmarks. But again, lots of value that is not being captured in those assessments. Interestingly, there are some discrepancies between what gets listed for the National Register and what gets listed for the city, or what's eligible on both those categories. Most notable is the fact that the Hotel Pennsylvania is not eligible for listing as a city landmark according to LPC, but it is eligible for the National Register. So we're walking along here under some scaffolding, but we're just about to come up on what's called the Fairmont Building. This is a building that was involved in the fur trade back in the day, built in 1923, and is another one of these buildings where it's eligible for the state and national register listing, but not for the city listing, according to the documentation that's out there. So here we are, we're coming up. You can see this really great facade with lots of detail, the little pediment over the door, the great arched front main window, and lots of detail. Beautiful building. And again, so many times it's because things haven't been power washed in a while that they're seen by many people as having little to no value. And yet, as we all know, as preservationists and urbanists, there's significant value there.
This whole area actually borders on what is the Garment Center and the fur, specifically the Fur District, which has a very interesting social history. in such that that's actually reflected in a number of the buildings around it. It's one of the sort of few places in New York City that I could easily think of that you actually see an expression of the Jewish influence, because so many of the fur traders were ethnic Jews, and they put some influence into many of the buildings, just into the facades. There also are a few institutions. There is a synagogue that was built for the fur traders. The whole area was placed on the National Register. Andrew Scott Dolkart wrote that nomination, but it is still, just because it's on the National Register does not mean that it's protected. So this is really, as the macroeconomics of the area change, we are going to see this area that has been slated for development in one way or the other for the past 30 years, but really accelerating under Mayor Bloomberg. We're going to see a lot of these buildings that have survived for 100 years at this point threatened.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned the synagogue, Simeon, because we're here in front of another sacred site, the 1872 St. John the Baptist Roman Catholic Church. This, if any of you are experts on churches in New York City, you might have heard the name of the architect, Napoleon Lebrun. So this is a pretty classic, I guess you could say really New York style, because you do have a brownstone facade here, but it is very much Gothic revival in its character.
LeBron did a number of firehouses actually too.
Yes.
So that's that sort of intersection of institutional buildings.
Absolutely. And just taking a look at some of the detail here. This is also a shrine to Padre Pio. And this is still very much an active church. The last time I walked through, I did check in and mass was underway. So it's still very much in use by the community. But this would be demolished if the Empire Station complex is allowed to proceed as planned. So I'm just to orient you, I am approaching 7th Avenue now, heading east on 30th Street. And Justin, just wanted to check, did you have anything you wanted to note about the Church of St. John the Baptist?
Just that I worked for the Capuchins, and they were a fun group who they actually had their headquarters there, and they, in their one of their chapels, actually had old Penn Station benches that they took after the demolition.
Oh wow!
But I think that one of the things to recognize about the building is it is the oldest one of the oldest surviving buildings in the neighborhood.
Definitely. Now I'm here at the southeast corner of 30th Street and 7th Avenue. And I'm looking up at a building. Again, I don't know what this building's name is. I don't know that it is on any list. But again, this goes to, I think, the Jacobsian principle of like walking your street, taking a look and saying to yourself, what is the value? How does this building fit into the ecosystem of the city? Clearly, lots of different businesses operating out of this building. And also some great little deco details here and there under the windows. And again, up at the top, you have this sort of asymmetrical massing and piling responding to that 1916 zoning resolution that required setbacks for light and the like. But that whole block that well, actually not the whole block, but half of the block that I'm showing you right here in this view would be destroyed. These two smaller buildings down below in brown brick would also get destroyed. The Mannheimer building is the smaller one. But let's head over across and take a look. Actually, I take that back. You know what? Let's just look up behind me here. See how this works.
Brad, I'm just gonna answer. Someone's been asking, a couple of people are asking the difference between city designation and state designation, National Register designation. Again, New York City landmark designation regulates private development and public development to a certain extent. National Register designation regulates only public development and also only to a certain extent. One of the main issues here is the way that Governor Cuomo is operating this through the Empire State Development Corporation actually specifically circumvents many of the land use review processes that have been put in place to help protect recognized historic resources. This was done specifically so that government can move forward and build.
That's a great point, Simeon. And the one point of public input on this whole complex was a public hearing originally planned for May 12th. That has been postponed indefinitely after the plan got more opposition than I think they were expecting. Another building behind me here is the Penn Terminal building from 1920. And again, this, if you're familiar with what's called Terminal City around Grand Central Terminal, it was all of the development that happened around the station as a node, a lot of it in this sort of Beaux-Arts classical revival style. Here at around Penn Station, or what was Old Penn Station, it is a little bit more of a hodgepodge than it is around, or was around, Grand Central Terminal. Buildings came in at different times. So this building, 1920, but then across the way, and we'll arrive there shortly, you will see the Stewart Hotel. Let me just flip this around for you. Now, the Stewart Hotel is not that building. Let's get it in view. There we go. This was formerly, when built in 1929, the Governor Clinton Hotel. And it goes all the way up there, 25 stories. Lots of elaborate detail on it. And I'm going to cross the avenue here if I dare, and I do. Here we go. But I want you to pay attention. If any of you have been to the Graybar building over by Grand Central Terminal, you might know about its awning that has a very interesting feature, some little rats scurrying up the ends of the awning. Well, the Stewart Hotel, the former Governor Clinton Hotel, I don't know if you'll be able to see it here, but up there, right where the guy post of the holding up the awning hits the building, there's a little squirrel on top, little carved squirrel. And then if you go up further, that second mast at the base of the flagpole is another little sort of false capital with several squirrels in play. So in case you need something to go check out as you're wandering around the city, the next time, go take a look and see in person the little squirrels that are at risk of demolition here in the footprint of the Empire Station complex.
Not to be all kind of nostalgic chic about this, but one of the things that has always really struck me about this area of town is the great deal of masonry and pretty much pre-World War II architecture, that it really is talking like 1910 through late 30s architecture that is, slightly dingy perhaps, but still very unchanged. You can easily imagine from the sort of golden years of the golden age of Hollywood happening here with just, a good rainstorm and maybe a fedora.
I always like to say, I'm just going to jump in for a minute. When I do the Penn tours, these buildings were built around, much like Brad, you said, sort of in a terminal city style around Penn Station. And it's amazing that the only building for years that has been missing has been the station. And I always used to say that in sort of like a breath of relief that at least we've got these reminders like Hotel Penn, like the Powerhouse and the post office and the Stewart Hotel that the station once existed. And this is one of the reasons why this whole thing breaks my heart so much. These buildings are now just wiped off as well.
Right, and behind me is Two Penn Plaza, which is right where the facade, the east-facing facade of the old McKim Mead White Penn Station Baths of Caracalla grandeur once stood. It's also the place where, if not mistaken, Jane Jacobs and others picketed in the 1960s. The group Agbany, which is an acronym for, it's actually escaping me as I'm walking around here amidst the crowds, precisely what Agbany stood for, but it's
Action for Better Architecture in New York.
amazing. Something that I was literally working on a post about the other day, but it slipped my mind. A group of architects primarily who were out here picketing when nobody else was. If you want to check out the NYPAP website, nypap.org, there's a full article on Agbany. And we're also really lucky because at least one person from Agbany is still around, Peter Sampton. And if you ever get a chance to speak with Peter, he's a fascinating source. He was there as a young architect with people like Philip Johnson and others who were literally out there on the line when it was very unfashionable to do so, trying to save what at the time was seen as a big white elephant with a lot of soot on it.
Brad,
Now, I'm going
to, if you want me to throw it up for a minute, I have.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I will. Let me screen share. And there it is. There they are. This isn't the Jane one, but this was. I think you can see Peter in this photo.
Yes, I believe that's him off in the background there.
Oh yeah, in the back. Let me play it. There you go. Class acts. All right, I'll drop it now.
Yes, it's making me feel as if I should have worn my fedora or my pearl necklace or gloves today, you know? All right, let's turn the camera around here because there's another building that we've been talking about that you all probably have seen at one point or another. You might have even called the number 65,000. This is the Hotel Pennsylvania, 1919. Also, McKim, Mead, and White, which is always kind of interesting to remember because it does seem so different in some ways than old Penn Station, but it too, like the power station that we started at, is McKim, Mead, and White. Now, this is a gigantic building. You can see sort of four wings, 4 bays going off down below, and in the front, facing what would have been the old Penn Station, there are, of course, the gigantic columns out front, which are still there. But I am going to walk you down now. I'm at 32nd Street heading east, just past 7th Avenue. But I wanted to see, you can see off in the distance, the exquisite Gimbel's Sky Bridge, a beautiful sort of verdigris green copper patina, really a miraculous thing that's somehow still there. But I wanted to point out that there's another sky bridge here at risk, up there between 2 parts of Hotel Pennsylvania. So I'm just going to walk us down here. Just to be clear, this entire block, 32nd up to 33rd, running from 7th Avenue over here, all the way over to 6th Avenue, all of it, all the way to Herald Square, everything would be demolished if the Empire Station complex is approved. The whole massive, massive city block. So just think again about all the embodied energy, all the embodied carbon, all the effort that went into making these buildings that would be destroyed instead of using, say, historic tax credits to revitalize these buildings.
And Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the Hotel Pennsylvania at least at one point the largest hotel in the world?
Yes, no, that is definitely true. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, the LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, indicates that this building is not eligible to be a city landmark.
Right.
That's really interesting. It is important to note, though, that multiple times people and groups have tried.
I have rejection letters from 2009.
So yes, this is a long-standing thing, and it is really interesting that, you know, LPC does find some of the buildings at risk to be worthy of individual designation, but not Hotel Pennsylvania, which I would have to say, of all the buildings in this footprint that are historic resources at risk, is probably the best known.
I would say so. I would also draw a little bit of a what's a analogy. That's not the right word. I'm losing my words. But that another building that the Landmarks Preservation Commission has long since said is never going to be a landmark is the Macy's store.
Ah, yes. Which is just, it's if you cross the block here to my left,
Yep.
and then go one more block, you're basically there. Because we are walking right now under the looming Sky Bridge, the Gimbels Sky Bridge. We are headed though for Herald Square, just to orient you.
And Macy's, I believe, is even on the National Register of Historic Places, but Landmark said, well, you know, they've changed the windows. Now, the answer is actually that the Macy's sponsors both the 4th of July fireworks and the Thanksgiving Day Parade. And so if they want to monetize their real estate holdings, nobody in city government is ever going to say boo.
Right. Now, we are looking right now at the former Gimbels store, or Gimbels Brothers. And you can see there's still some significant detail, even if the interior is largely changed, and if there's been some changes up at the top. If you look up, you probably can't see it, but if you're seeing any little projections, oh, my little doohickey is going crazy here. Sorry, one moment. Let me get us back in order.
And I just look at that, Brad, and I just think, wouldn't that be better if it was shiny? Honestly, I think.
Are you saying you want just giant panes of glass, Simeon?
Yeah, no, I think that that's what we really need to see. Like just really big, maybe even mirrored panes of glass.
Yeah, very, sort of bird unfriendly mirrored panes of glass.
The
Sounds
sort
great.
of thing that, melts cars that are, close by it.
Yes. But the Gimbels store, this entire half a block long, half a block wide, or full block wide building would be destroyed. Yet again, another victim if the Empire Station Complex is approved. Now, here we have a great little shot of the Gimbels Sky Bridge. It's also, I think it's technically called the Gimbels Traverse. But it doesn't necessarily look like it from this vantage point, but it is 3 stories high.
Wow.
With elaborate sort of, this is the 1920s. This is earlier deco before you get into that sort of classic 1930s harsh, truly fully geometric style art deco. But I'm walking along here just to give you a sense of how massive these buildings are. The Hotel Pennsylvania and Gimbels are both elephantine buildings. They are large. This is a lot of built fabric.
What I find funny though, Brad, is that actually, even though these are enormous buildings, as you say, they still work on a very human scale. You still have a very pedestrian experience because they're broken up by these masonry piers, even though the infill has been changed and filled in with, nice friendly glass. You still don't get lost the way one does, for example, when you're walking around the Hudson Yards and you have these giant buildings you can't even figure out where to go in and out of.
Absolutely. And it's because there's still reference points for the human scale. You can still see from these banks of windows that this is a building for humans. And I do feel like so many architects in contemporary times have lost sight of the value of doing that. And you do have sort of the Palladian system in play here that is so familiar to us. You have sort of the plinth level, the base, then you have sort of the shaft of the column, the middle part, and then at the top you have a finial. So you can't really see it very well here, but there are actually the faces of sculpturally carved lions peeking out at the top, looking out. So again, just as you're saying, Simeon, there's still plenty here for a human mind to hold on to feel and find familiar. And I feel like that's a big part of this is if the Empire Station Complex is approved and all of this is just raised and clear cut, it leaves us with so few anchors. When you walk out of Penn Station, no matter what it looks like in the future, what will your eye turn to? Will you feel like you're home? And I talked to a number of people who are not even preservationists. And when I told them that the Hotel Pennsylvania would be demolished, they said, wow, that actually makes me weirdly sad because I have come to know that building as a marker that I am truly back in New York. Even with all of its scuffs and buffs, it's still something that's part of our experience here in the city, just based on its longevity, its size, and its aesthetics. But let's take a look back at the Gimbels building, and there you can see the Gimbels Sky Bridge with a lovely bit of refracted, reflected light on it here in the afternoon. And I am standing now on 6th Avenue, currently looking north and walking into Herald Square. And I think I will just sort of wrap up my man on the street mission here with a little salute to Horace Greeley, but really it's not about him, because as he said, go west, young man, to the footprint of the Empire Station Complex that is at risk.
Horace would have hated this plan, Brad.
Oh, very much.
I love Horace.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, Brad. Amazing to bring us on the street.
Yeoman's work, Brad. Well
Yeah.
done.
Great.
It's been a pleasure.
And for all of that amazing insight. We have a lot of people who have many questions about the process. And I don't know, Simeon, do you want to field a couple of those?
Sure, I've been trying to as I'm going through. Actually, Justin, you probably know this better. The current Hotel Pennsylvania isn't the old Statler Hilton, is it?
Well, it was the Statler Hilton, yes. So I mean, the Statler family owned it for a period of time, and then sold it, and then that owner sold it to Vornado. So I think the Statlers were 2 or 3 owners out. And I noticed there was somebody on the chat talking about being in the Cafe Rouge. I think now that the Hotel Pennsylvania has, is looking at the end of its life, a lot of people realize the cultural significance of the building, not only the architectural significance. As Brad mentioned, you've got Pennsylvania 65000, which was a popular Glenn Miller song. I know Peter Taylor is on this talk. He gave me a wonderful recording of it from Cafe Rouge. And, Cafe Rouge itself was a beautiful room. They actually applied for an interior landmark on Cafe Rouge. It got denied. Cafe Rouge was converted recently into a basketball court for a photo shoot, and then it turned into an event space. I can show you. I've got a picture or two of it because I know we've got a lot of people thinking about the Hotel Penn. And this is Cafe Rouge, of course, back in the
My goodness.
heyday of the Pennsylvania Hotel. Gorgeous, gorgeous room. That iconic fountain built into the wall, which is still in the Cafe Rouge today.
Really?
It is.
Now,
see how it's been changed. Yes, Brad.
Sorry to jump in, Justin. Simeon, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a big band protest to save Hotel Pennsylvania coming up on May 12th at something like 11 a.m.?
I believe there very well might be. I have heard tell about that. I'm not sure if it's been confirmed yet because there was concerns about weather.
Yes.
But everyone should both keep their eyes open. You have all signed up, so that Justin should have your information, and hopefully Untapped New York will be able to cover this big band kind of music in.
Keep your dancing shoes handy.
I do believe we are covering it. We are going to make a mention of it. So, yes.
George Calderaro says it's confirmed in the chat.
There you go.
There you go. And and Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there some discussion about balloons, or is that later?
Yeah, no, I've heard tell Simeon that there might be something, say June 3rd or so.
That might be it. That's it. I get the days confused.
Yeah, June 3rd, I'm hearing that there might be a little mini sort of walking protest from the old power station over to the Gimbels Sky Bridge with perhaps some balloons involved somehow. So
that
again,
sounds
stay
like a
tuned.
really neat thing.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Let me also just call out to everybody who's on this, if there's anyone involved with the American Kennel Club. The Kennel Club, of course, the dog show was famously would kind of sheltered in the and based around the Hotel Pennsylvania, and I would just love the notion of a dog parade to help try to save this building.
That would be amazing. That would, I didn't even, Simeon, that's genius.
No, honestly, there, if we could save Wilderstein in the historic Hudson Valley, which was the home, of course, of FDR's Fala, then we should be able to save the Hotel Pennsylvania.
So true.
All right,
Aaron,
yes.
I'm answering a chat while we're doing this.
That's great. Yeah. There's a question here about tax credits. It's a complicated issue. If Vornado actually wanted to use tax credits or certain kinds of credits to rehab the Hotel Pennsylvania, they could do quite nicely for it, as well as environmental credits, just like the Empire State Building used certain kinds of upgrading environmental credits, as well as a rehab tax credits to fix up the Empire. If anyone's gone to the Empire and remembers what it looked like before, they did all the beautiful restoration of the lobby murals. They also replaced all the windows. They actually had their own like window manufacturing factory hidden away in one of the floors. So something like this really could be a remarkable tax credit project in New York City, because New York City, our tax credits tend to be these very, very large projects. In other places, there's usually speaking, tax credits are used for smaller projects, more residential projects, or even smaller commercial projects. But in order to truly monetize it, the Hotel Pennsylvania, I think, could probably be a major tax credit project that would show how successful the program was. It's a New York State and a federal program. It's commercial. And Vornado, who are the owners, would probably save a bundle of money on it.
Right. And, one really great place to check out, if you want to see some examples of historic tax credit projects at somewhat larger scale like this, hotels and the like, check out the National Trust Community Investment Corporation. It's a lot of words, NTCIC, but if you go to their website, they have examples of their work of past projects, and it's really inspiring. It really shows you what can be done, and it shows you that there is, in many cases, an alternative. When a building has become a little down by its heels, it does not mean that things are over. And NTCIC has just fantastic justifications for why it might make sense for a building owner to take a different course than demolition.
And I realize as professional preservationists, we sound like everything is the end of the world. I was quoted in today's New York Times saying that the development on the South Street Seaport parking lot is the end of the world, which it is. But the fact is that when we're talking about Pennsylvania Station, the history of historic preservation in America is based around transit hubs. And it is something that we know a lot about. It is something that has been studied at this point for over half a century, 60 some odd years, where we can really discuss destroying transit hubs, trying to redo transit hubs, throwing them away, rehabbing them. And there are lots and lots and lots of examples and across this country. And in every example, or almost every example, where preservation took precedence, where adaptive reuse of a transit hub that also with its modernization happened. These are all success stories, just time and time and time again. And you're even starting to see places like in Buffalo, they're bringing back their old transit hub, right, remarkably, in a way that no one ever thought could be possible. In Detroit, again, similarly, Pittsburgh, of course, is a famous one. But you can just start talking about it again, and you can get very original. If anyone's ever been to San Francisco, there is the ferry terminal building which has been completely reinvented, and they even brought ferry service back to it. So these are things that we know how to do. This is not like a new idea. It just requires a commitment to a good idea.
Right,
Simeon,
right.
I'm gonna even say we've done it with Moynihan.
Right.
It's right there. They repurposed a building what they were using 30% of, and the rest of it was rotting away. And they turned it into a pretty great answer for more space needed. And that's, I said that during our first commission, our first talk in March. You've given a taste of what's possible right in our own backyard. Don't screw it up now. We can keep doing better by these buildings and by Penn Station. We don't have to go worse.
Right. And, just one other thing to mention here, because so much of the justification being put forward for this Empire Station complex is about transit, I think it's really important for people to take a deeper look, do some more reading on the transit elements here. Because once you start digging into this gigantic environmental impact statement, a lot of the people I've talked to in the transit realm say, a lot of this really just looks like a real estate land grab with the transit element as a pretext for using eminent domain and for demolition, et cetera. So, there's some groups out there that are calling for through running trains as an alternate means of avoiding some of this demolition. And I'm not even going to get into that in full because there are many people out there who know the transit details in far greater depth than I do. And Justin, I'm sure, knows more than I do. But the focus of today has been chiefly on what's at risk above ground. So, please go out there and do some more diligence if you are really fired up after today's walk and want to dig in and find out more.
Great.
And indeed, when Brad says land grab, again, trigger words for preservation, but it is a land grab. It is like actually an honest dictionary definition of the state coming in, telling the community boards that they're not part of it, telling, Governor Cuomo doing his favorite thing and telling Mayor de Blasio that he's not part of it. Basically just saying, we're going to come in, we're going to seize private and public property, and the citizens of New York City, the New Yorkers, and the city of New York has nothing really to do about it except for, I don't know, just not walk here for 10 years while we're like ripping everything down.
Right. To make New York better, by the way.
Right. That's what it's going to be about.
Thank you. An interesting question came in. Is there a reason the Empire Station complex preserves MSG, whose lease is expiring? And it goes right back to what both Brad and Simeon are talking about. MSG's protected because there are interests of everybody who's involved here that it's better to keep MSG where it is. Looking at those renderings, it's really sad when Madison Square Garden is the architectural remnant in the neighborhood if Empire Station complex comes to pass. It's the oldest looking building in that neighborhood. And, it's all because MSG Corporation doesn't want to move. They want $2 billion for air rights if they have to move. They don't want to have to fork that over. So what we'll do is we'll just put these, revitalized entrances, on the north and the south side and just call it a day and leave it there. It's like, but that you're tearing down beautiful buildings around it for what, And again, it's the same thing. I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Textbook definition of a land grab.
And mostly that the powers that be refuse to play ball with the Dolans.
No, right, exactly. The Dolan. I was not going to mention the Dolans, but
it's a family-owned business.
Right. Right.
Someone does mention if Vornado has received tax credits for the restoration of major properties. Hilariously, actually, they have. If you go to Vornado or Vornado, I don't really know how they pronounce it. If you go to their website, they are aggressive about how they revitalize and rehab and restore the lost luster of their portfolio. Except, of course, here or when it's not was not convenient.
Yeah. it's interesting. Somebody just put in there, the garden must be moved in order to redo and move the tracks. And that's what they're saying that needs to be done on 31st and 30th Street. We need to move those buildings to build the tracks. And I'm like, guys, you build a whole sports complex over them before, which should be moved instead. So it's very interesting. Could you tell us how strong the opposition to the Empire Station complex may be at this point? Do you know which groups or associations have taken a stand? Simeon or Brad, you might be more.
Sure. How strong? It would take a nation of millions to hold us back. But a lot of different groups are coming together. And they're coming out from a lot of different angles. I'm in conversation with a lot of transit-oriented groups and a couple of preservation groups. Some of the people in the chat are involved as well, both neighborhood groups, the 29th Street Association, and the City Club is part of that as a citywide partner, Human Scale City Alliance, all of our friends there on, in another kind of, not silo, but in the lane over on next over, there are a number of urban groups and planning groups that are we're not all coordinating, but we are all coming to similar solutions that the current Empire Station plan is not a good plan.
Right. And Simeon, community boards in the area are also incensed about this.
Community Board 5 and Community Board 4 have been very strong on this and are getting stronger. It is one of the curiosities that some of our elected officials are very strong on it. Other ones are trying to triangulate with all of the current issues that Governor Cuomo is having. He pulled a fast one with regards to putting in something in the budget at the last second that allowed for, that basically was a $1.3 billion slush fund for eminent domain. So there's a lot of people, and I think that we're starting to, especially with media partners like Untapped New York and events like this, I think that we're actually starting to sort of push the needle a little bit. There was a decent article by Justin Davidson in New York Magazine just yesterday that, while it didn't come out on any side, it said, let's look at this, but there's the possibility that something good could come of it. But that shows an interest involved. So I don't know. I mean, there are massive forces that are pushing for it. And I do not want to underestimate the vested interests, which are really looking to retire. And some of these people are in their 20s, but they're looking to retire off of managing to pull this one together. Right. So that is quite serious.
Right.
Somebody mentions, protect all of Midtown South, which, yes, we need to. Hilariously and horribly, of course, part of the city administration starts rebranding Union Square as Midtown South. So, yeah, no, it's terrifying.
I'm actually stunned by that.
There was, when our colleagues at Village Preservation were fighting the Tech Hub on 14th Street.
Right.
There was a whole thing about calling, 14th Street Midtown South, and we're like, south of what? South of It's 10003. It's not Midtown anything.
Wow. Well, I think on that note, if there are any other questions, now is the time. If not, we thank you all for joining us. Also, again, sincerely apologize for whatever technical hiccup that was at the beginning, but we are glad that 91 of you followed us over to this new room, and we're glad it worked. And thank you, Brad, very much for bringing us down onto the site. And
eyes on the street, eyes on the street.
Eyes on the street.
And Justin, people have been asking, this is going to be on the Untapped website as well as the Municipal Arts Society's website?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is, we've recorded it. It's been recorded. I'm going to edit it, and then I will send it to the MAS. The MAS will send it out to you via the email list they have. We're also going to put it on Untapped New York's website, so that you can get it there as well. So you can go either to Untapped New York, probably either tomorrow or the latest Monday, and you'll find it there. And the MAS will send this recording out to you as well. And we'll try to give you all the pertinent information as well, as along with petitions to sign and any of the other links that are important. So thank you, Simeon, as well, for giving us your great knowledge and trying to lead us through this morass of
And thank you for Untapped and also
Yes.
to MAS and Jane's Walk for really giving us the opportunity for this platform.
Yes,
It's
thank
incredible.
you.
Here.
This is really the work of Jane. We are doing this in the greatest amount of her spirit as possible. So thank you.
Yes, and thank you for vaulting us over the technological obstacles today, Justin.
Oh yeah. Like I said, I felt
We-
like I was
we
sort
made
of
it.
I was landing a plane without an engine there for a minute.
Well, you achieved it with Sully-like grace.
I was
So
going
thank
to
you.
say, thanks. No geese here. Well, thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon, everybody, and a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you out on the street. All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Take care.